Dallas, Texas. The skyline glittered with the arrogance of money, mirrored towers and chrome facades reflecting the relentless Texas sun. Inside one of those towers sat Harold Jennings, a man who mistook wealth for worth and mirrors for meaning. He owned the Jennings Crown Hotel, a 20-story monument to himself. Polished marble floors, golden chandeliers, and staff who smiled because their paychecks depended on it. Harold liked it that way. That morning, he was pacing the lobby, fixing his tie in every reflective surface. His assistant, Emily, followed close behind with a tablet in hand, trying to keep up with his clipped steps. "Emily," he said sharply, "why are we still short-staffed in housekeeping?" "Sir, we've filled most of the roles. Only one left, the morning shift. We have a candidate coming in today." "Good. Make sure she's not one of those lazy types. I don't want slow people dragging down my standards." He said, "slow," the same way some men said, "disease." Emily hesitated. "Her file says she's a bit older, and what? She's a larger woman, sir," Harold snorted. "Fantastic. Just what this place needs, another walking buffet line. Why can't people control themselves?" Emily looked down, pretending to read something, hoping the silence would swallow the cruelty. At 10:03, Grace Miller walked into the lobby. She was 53, with kind eyes and a soft motherly face that life had worn but not defeated. Her uniform was freshly ironed, her shoes polished, her hands nervous but steady. Grace had worked as a cleaner all her life. She'd buried a husband who loved her and raised a grandson who adored her. Every morning before dawn she prayed, "Lord, give me strength to serve with dignity, even when they don't see me." She didn't know that prayer would be tested before lunch. Harold spotted her instantly. She wasn't what he expected, not glamorous, not fit, not someone who'd blend into the hotel's designer aesthetic. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Miller, is it? You're here for housekeeping." "Yes, sir," she said softly. "I've worked in hotels most of my life. I'm a hard worker, and stop," he raised a hand. "You're aware this job requires a lot of physical movement?" Grace nodded. "Yes, sir. I can handle it. I may not be fast, but I'm steady. I don't stop until the job's done." Harold smirked. "I'm sure the buffet line hears that often," Emily winced. Grace blinked, a flicker of hurt behind her calm. But she didn't flinch. "I'm not here to eat, sir. I'm here to work." Her voice carried no anger, only quiet conviction. It irritated Harold. People like her always did. Too calm, too grounded, too unwilling to be crushed. By noon, Grace was in uniform, cleaning guest suites on the 10th floor. She hummed hymns under her breath. Amazing Grace, of course, wiping mirrors and changing linens with practiced grace. When Harold made his inspection rounds, he stopped in her room. "Miller, are you done with this suite?" "Almost, sir. I'm just polishing the..." He swiped a finger across the counter and held it up. "Dust." Grace leaned forward. "I'm sorry, sir. I must have missed or ignored." She shook her head. "No, sir, I would never ignore. Do you realize what this hotel charges per night? People don't pay $500 to find dust." Her throat tightened. "I'll fix it right away." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Do that, or you'll be out the door before dinner." Then, louder for the benefit of nearby staff, "And maybe skip dessert next time. Mrs. Miller, you'll move faster." Laughter rippled among a few employees too afraid to stay silent. Grace felt the weight of their stares like knives. She kept her head down, polishing harder, whispering the only words that steadied her heart. "Father, forgive him. He doesn't see." That evening, the hotel hosted a private event. Investors, socialites, and local press. Harold strutted through the ballroom like a peacock in a tailored suit. He loved nights like this. The flash of cameras, the clink of champagne glasses, the way people called him sir with admiration rather than obligation. Grace was assigned to the refreshment table, replacing trays and clearing glasses. She worked quietly, unnoticed, until she accidentally bumped into a waiter, sending a few droplets of wine onto Harold's sleeve. He turned sharply. "Unbelievable," he hissed. "Can't you even handle a tray?" "I'm so sorry, sir. Of course you are." He yanked a napkin from the table and began dabbing his jacket dramatically. "Maybe if you spent less time eating the guests' leftovers and more time paying attention." Gasps fluttered around the room. Grace froze, tears burning behind her eyes. "Mr. Jennings," said a young investor cautiously. "That's a bit harsh." Harold turned on him. "Do you run this hotel?" The man fell silent. Harold faced Grace again. "Clean it up. Then get out of my sight." She crouched, gathering the broken glass, her fingers trembling. In that moment, someone snapped a photo. The CEO towering over the maid on her knees, wine dripping from his sleeve, anger twisting his face. It would be online by morning. When Grace finished cleaning, she slipped out the back door, breathing in the cool night air. The streetlights painted soft halos on the wet pavement. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. "Lord," she whispered, "help me not to hate him." Tears fell, not from humiliation, but from exhaustion. She'd spent a lifetime swallowing pain, turning the other cheek. Some days, it felt like there was nothing left to turn. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and walked toward the bus stop. Inside the hotel, Harold poured himself a glass of bourbon, completely unaware that his empire was about to learn what pride costs, and that the woman he'd mocked would soon become the mirror God used to save him. The sun in Dallas rose hot and merciless, reflecting off glass towers that hid ugliness behind their polish, much like Harold Jennings himself. He woke late, his head pounding from the bourbon that had dulled his conscience the night before. The echo of laughter from the ballroom still rang in his mind, though not the laughter he wanted. He remembered faces frozen in awkward silence, a few eyes filled with pity. Not for him, but for her. He brushed it off. "They'll forget by morning," he told himself, adjusting his tie in the mirror. People always forget, but people didn't forget. By 8:15 a.m., Harold's assistant, Emily, burst into his office. Her voice shook. "Sir, we have a problem." He didn't look up from his espresso. "What now?" She hesitated. "The video." "What video?" She placed her tablet on the desk. "Someone filmed last night. You. Yelling at Mrs. Miller. It's everywhere." Harold frowned, then clicked play. There it was, his face twisted in arrogance, his voice dripping with venom. "Maybe if you spent less time eating the guests' leftovers." He stopped it halfway, rage and disbelief boiling together. This is out of context." "Sir," Emily said softly, "people don't care about context. They care about outrage." #JusticeForGrace is trending. By noon, the hotel's PR inbox had over 1,000 angry emails. By evening, the first sponsors pulled out. By morning, a local news station aired the clip, calling it another case of workplace cruelty. Harold threw his phone against the wall. "Where is she?" "I want her gone." "She already resigned," Emily said quietly. "Left her badge on your desk." Harold stared at the small silver name tag that read Grace M. The irony didn't escape him. Grace, the one thing he'd never shown. For the next few weeks, Harold did damage control. He hired PR teams, issued a statement that the incident was exaggerated, and even tried to paint Grace as a disgruntled former employee. It backfired spectacularly. One journalist uncovered that Grace had spent weekends volunteering at a local shelter, feeding the homeless, even donating part of her small paycheck to other workers. The public adored her. They despised him. His investors called for an emergency meeting. In the boardroom of Jennings Crown, Harold faced 12 stone-faced directors. At the head of the table sat Robert Hawley, the company's oldest shareholder. He removed his glasses slowly. "Harold, we built this brand on service and hospitality. You've turned it into a circus. Robert, please. No, Harold. I've watched you lose touch with decency for years. This is the final straw. You're firing me. Harold's voice cracked. We're asking you to step down. Before the public does it for you. Harold's laugh was hollow. You can't do this. This is my company, Robert sighed. It stopped being yours the day you forgot what people are worth. 2 days later, Harold Jennings was no longer CEO. He sat in his penthouse surrounded by silence that used to comfort him. Now it suffocated. He poured another drink, then another, until the lights of the city blurred into streaks of gold. His reflection in the window looked older than he remembered. Puffy eyes, gray roots, a man who looked like he'd been living off pride instead of food. Grace Miller, he muttered bitterly. The woman who ruined me. But somewhere deep down, beneath the alcohol and denial, he knew that wasn't true. He ruined himself. 3 weeks passed. Bills piled up, partnerships dissolved, tabloids printed headlines like, "Fallen Hotel King faces bankruptcy. Public demands apology to hero Maid." Harold ignored it all. Until one afternoon, he heard a knock at his door. When he opened it, standing there was a delivery boy with an envelope, no return address. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping. It showed a photo of Grace Miller, smiling outside a community center, surrounded by children holding paper bags of food. The headline read, "Former Maid starts free meal program for families affected by layoffs." Below, a quote, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting what was done. It's remembering who you want to be, Grace Miller." Harold stared at the page for a long time. For the first time in years, something stirred inside him. Not guilt, exactly, but a quiet ache. He set the clipping on his desk, next to the untouched whiskey glass. Then, for reasons he didn't understand, he whispered aloud, "Forgiveness? From me?" The room didn't answer. But for the first time in his adult life, Harold Jennings didn't feel like the most powerful man in it. Weeks blurred into months. His savings dwindled. His friends stopped returning calls. The city that once admired him moved on, except for one small corner of it. Grace's meal program kept growing. Local churches donated space. Volunteers lined up. The same media that destroyed Harold now celebrated her. And in a twist only life could script, the hotel that once belonged to Harold began sponsoring her foundation to improve public image. Harold read about it online, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "My hotel," he whispered. "Her name on my walls." He stared at the article photo, Grace serving soup to children, and something cracked open inside him. Not anger. Not shame, something simpler, envy of her peace. A month later, fate forced their paths to cross again. Harold had begun walking more, not for exercise, but to escape the walls that whispered failure. One evening, passing through downtown Dallas, he noticed a long line outside a church basement. A banner fluttered above the door. Grace's table, free meals for anyone in need. He froze. Her name, her place, something inside him pushed his feet forward. He entered quietly, blending in with the crowd. Volunteers bustled about, ladling soup, handing out bread, greeting everyone with warmth. The air smelled of garlic and hope. And then he saw her. Grace Miller in a simple apron, smiling as she served an elderly man his meal. Her hair was grayer now, her frame softer, but her spirit filled the room like sunlight through stained glass. She turned, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Harold froze, guilt flooding his veins. He half expected her to call security, to shame him the way he once did her. Instead, she smiled. Not the polite smile of a stranger. The forgiving smile of someone who had already laid her pain at the feet of God. "Mr. Jennings," she said softly. "It's been a while." His voice was barely a whisper. "You remember me?" "I remember everyone I pray for," she said simply. He couldn't speak. The lump in his throat was too heavy. "Would you like something to eat?" she asked, as though he were any other lost soul at her table. He nodded numbly, accepting the bowl she offered. The soup was warm, simple, real, and for the first time in decades, Harold felt full, not with pride, but with humility. That night, lying awake in his small rented apartment, Harold couldn't escape her words. "I remember everyone I pray for." He didn't know why that cut deeper than any insult ever had. It was mercy he couldn't earn, and that's what made it unbearable. Over the next week, he returned to Grace's table again and again. Not for food, but for something else, the quiet peace that lingered there. He started helping without asking, stacking chairs, sweeping floors, carrying boxes. At first, volunteers eyed him warily, but Grace never questioned it. "Everyone has something to give," she said, handing him a mop one evening. "Even if it's just time." He cleaned floors without complaint, the same task he'd once mocked her for. And with each sweep of the mop, he felt pieces of his old self wash away. One evening, after most people had left, Grace found him standing by the door. He looked different now, thinner, quieter, eyes softer. "Why do you keep coming back, Mr. Jennings?" she asked. He hesitated. "Because I think. I'm starting to see what you see." "And what's that?" "That peace isn't something you buy," he said. "It's something you serve." She smiled. "That's a good start. But redemption isn't linear. It never is." Because that same night, Harold received a letter. A lawsuit from a former partner, accusing him of fraud, negligence, and mismanagement. If convicted, he'd lose everything he had left. For hours he sat staring at the paper. Old instincts returned: anger, panic, pride. He wanted to fight back, to prove he was still somebody. Then he looked around the small apartment, the mop by the door, the soup bowl from Grace's table, and whispered, "Lord, if you're real, help me not fight this like I used to." He didn't know what faith was supposed to feel like. But for the first time, he didn't feel alone. The Dallas courthouse smelled like cold marble and fear. Harold Jennings, once a man who commanded boardrooms, now stood waiting for his name to be called like any other defendant. His suit was 2 years old, his tie frayed, his hands trembling not from weakness but from humiliation. Cameras waited outside. Reporters shouted his name when he arrived that morning. "Mr. Jennings, any comment on the fraud charges? Do you regret how you treated Grace Miller?" He kept his head down, eyes fixed on the courthouse steps. There was a time when he loved attention. Now, every flashbulb felt like judgment. Inside the courtroom, the world that had once bowed to him turned its back. His former partner, Daniel Pierce, sat at the plaintiff's table, a smirk carved into his face. Daniel had been Harold's protege once, eager, loyal, clever, until greed and ego split them apart. Now Daniel claimed Harold had falsified expense records years ago to protect profits. Some of it was true, some twisted beyond recognition, but it didn't matter. The internet had already declared its verdict: Harold Jennings, villain of karma. Grace's name surfaced again in headlines, but she stayed silent. She refused interviews, telling one reporter gently, "We all make mistakes. Some just need more time to learn from them." Those words found their way to Harold. He read them from a newspaper on his cot in the courthouse holding room. For the first time, he didn't scoff. He just stared, long, quiet, broken. The trial stretched on for days. Each witness chipped away at his pride, every piece of evidence a mirror reflecting his arrogance. When the verdict finally came guilty of financial misconduct, he didn't even flinch. He'd already lost more important things than money. Outside, a reporter thrust a microphone in his face. "Mr. Jennings, what do you have to say to Grace Miller?" He paused, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse. "Tell her." She was right. Then he walked away, not toward the car waiting for him, but toward nowhere in particular. The sky looked the same as it had when he mocked her, yet everything underneath it had changed. The following weeks were a blur. Harold lost his last property. the penthouse he'd once called his throne. He sold what he could, donated the rest, and moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment near the edge of town. Gone were the tailored suits and Italian shoes. Now he wore thrift store shirts and drove an old pickup that coughed smoke every few blocks. He started seeing things differently, not out of enlightenment, but necessity. He noticed the janitors who swept sidewalks before dawn, the cashiers who smiled through exhaustion, the single mothers juggling groceries and crying toddlers. People he used to overlook had faces now. And every face reminded him of Grace. One rainy afternoon, his truck stalled near an underpass. He stepped out, cursing softly, but the rain drowned his frustration. As he popped the hood, he heard laughter behind him, children playing in the mud. He turned and froze. Across the street stood a small community kitchen. Painted on the front, in large blue letters, were the words, "Grace's Table Hope Served Daily." He hadn't meant to come this way. But perhaps that was the point. Inside, warmth and noise filled the space. The clatter of pots, the chatter of families, the smell of chili and cornbread. Harold stood at the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the tile. A young volunteer spotted him. "You here for a meal, sir?" He hesitated. I'm here to see Grace Miller." The boy nodded and disappeared into the back. Moments later, Grace emerged, apron dusted with flour, hair tied in a bun, her face tired but glowing. For a second, neither spoke. Then Harold smiled faintly. "Seems you built a kingdom while I was busy losing mine." She wiped her hands on her apron. "It's not a kingdom, Harold. It's just a kitchen. But it feeds more people than your hotel ever did." He laughed, a broken, genuine laugh. "You always did have better business instincts." She tilted her head, studying him. "You look different." "I should," he said quietly. "The old me wouldn't have come here. Then maybe you're finally seeing what mattered all along." Over the next few days, Harold began volunteering. At first, it was awkward, the ex-millionaire learning to scrub pots and sweep floors. But the rhythm of service soothed him in ways power never had. He found comfort in the simplicity. Ladle soup, wipe tables, smile. He began talking with the people he once would have avoided, the homeless veteran who quoted scripture, the single father who prayed before every meal, the teenage boy who dreamed of becoming a chef. And through them, Harold began learning his lessons. Lesson 1, pride isolates, humility connects. Lesson 2, work isn't beneath you when it feeds someone else. Lesson 3, mercy can rebuild what shame destroys. One evening, after most had gone home, Grace sat beside him at one of the long wooden tables. "You don't have to stay this late," she said. He shrugged. "I like hearing the quiet after the noise. It reminds me that peace isn't silence, it's purpose." Grace smiled softly. "You're learning fast." "Maybe," he said, glancing around. "I wish I'd learned sooner. You know, I used to think people like you were born to serve people like me. And now?" He took a deep breath. "Now I see I was born to serve people like you." She didn't answer immediately. Then she placed a hand over his. "Then maybe God's not done with you yet." But not every day brought peace. Redemption, Harold learned, was a battlefield between the man he'd been and the man he wanted to become. One morning, an SUV pulled up to the shelter. Out stepped Victoria, his former fiancée, immaculately dressed, her perfume cutting through the smell of soup and bleach. She looked around with disgust. "So this is where you've been hiding?" "I'm not hiding," Harold said calmly. "I'm working." "Working?" She laughed. "Harold, you were one of the most powerful men in Dallas. And now you're scrubbing floors with maids and addicts?" He didn't rise to her bait. "You should try it sometime. It's honest work." Victoria crossed her arms. "You've lost your mind." "No," he said, turning back to his mop. "I think I finally found it." She left in silence, heels echoing down the hallway like the last footsteps of his old life. That night, Harold couldn't sleep. Her words stung, not because he believed them, but because he once would have said them himself. He stared at the ceiling, whispering to the darkness, "Lord, I don't know why you spared me when I wasted everything you gave me. But if you're still listening, help me not waste this chance." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peace. It was the sound of Grace doing its quiet work. Weeks turned to months. Grace's health began to fade. She coughed often, her steps slower. Harold noticed but said nothing. She had given her entire life to others. Now he wanted to give something back. He started running the kitchen when she couldn't, organized food drives, collected donations, fixed the leaking roof himself. And one evening, after closing, he found her sitting alone, staring at the cross that hung on the wall. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said gently. She smiled weakly. "So are you. I owe it to you." "You don't owe me anything, Harold. Just keep feeding people." "That's enough." He knelt beside her chair. "I used to think my legacy was marble and money. But I see now, it's soup kitchens and second chances." Grace reached up, touching his cheek. "That's the man I prayed you'd become." Later that night, Harold locked the door and stood outside beneath the soft drizzle. The neon sign buzzed above him, Grace's table. He whispered to the night, "Lord, thank you for teaching me the hardest way possible." He didn't realize that lesson number 7, love redeems what shame destroys, was yet to come. Winter arrived early in Dallas that year. The kind of cold that bit through the skin and reminded people how fragile warmth really was. Inside Grace's table, steam rose from pots of soup as volunteers hustled to feed a line that wrapped around the corner. But Grace Miller wasn't there that morning. Her apron hung on the wall like a flag retired after battle. She was at Methodist General Hospital, room 312, her frail hands resting atop a wool blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. The doctors had told her the truth weeks ago. Her heart was failing. She had ignored the fatigue, the chest pain, the dizziness. For a woman who had spent a lifetime serving others, she didn't know how to rest. Now she had no choice. Harold Jennings arrived just before noon, clutching a small bouquet of daisies, the kind you find at a grocery store when you don't know how to buy flowers, but need to say something words can't. When he stepped into the room, she smiled faintly. "You found the place." He tried to joke, but his throat tightened. "You didn't exactly make it easy. Had to ask 3 nurses. I think they thought I was lost." Grace chuckled softly, the sound thin but still kind. "You were lost, Harold, but you found your way long before you found this room." He sat beside her, awkward at first, unsure what to do with his hands. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that I get to see my husband again soon," she said gently. "And maybe tell God a few things about you." He lowered his head. "Please don't tell him everything." She laughed, a tired, wheezing sound that filled the room with light. For a while, they sat in silence. Machines hummed softly. Snow drifted past the window. Harold wanted to say so much, but the words tangled somewhere between guilt and gratitude. Finally, Grace spoke. "Do you remember what you said to me that night in the ballroom?" He winced. "Every word. I wish I could erase it." "Don't," she said firmly. "If you did, you might forget how far you've come." He looked up. "How do you do that? How can you forgive me like that?" Grace smiled. "Because forgiveness isn't pretending it didn't hurt. It's choosing not to let the hurt define you. God didn't spare me pain, Harold. He just gave me purpose in it." Her eyes softened. "And now he's given that purpose to you." He shook his head. "No, I'm not you." "No," she agreed, "you're you." Which is exactly what this world needs now. A man who learned that power isn't in shouting, but in serving. She reached for his hand, her skin paper thin, her grip still strong. "I've seen pride destroy a lot of men, Harold. But I've only seen grace rebuild a few. Promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, keep Grace's table open. Keep feeding people. Not for me, for him." His voice cracked. "I will. I swear I will. Good, she whispered. Then I can rest. Grace Miller passed away 3 nights later. The volunteers gathered at the kitchen the next morning, candles flickering across the tables. Harold stood before them, trembling as he read her favorite verse from a worn Bible found in her apron pocket. Do not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time you will reap a harvest if you do not give up. Galatians 6-9. When he finished, he closed the book and whispered, She never gave up. So neither will we. Months passed. The kitchen became busier than ever. Donations poured in from all over the state. The same journalists who once ridiculed Harold now told the story of a man transformed. He refused interviews. He told everyone, Grace is the story. I'm just the echo. But one article appeared anyway in the Dallas Morning Chronicle. Headline, From Arrogance to Altruism, the CEO who found redemption in a soup kitchen. The piece ended with a quote from Harold. She taught me 7 lessons, each one heavier than pride, but lighter than peace. Spring came. The city bloomed again. One morning, Harold stood outside the church where Grace had first started serving meals. The old wooden door creaked, sunlight cutting through the dust. He had an announcement to make. To the volunteers, donors, and guests gathered around, he said, We're opening a new shelter. It's called the Grace House. It'll offer food, shelter, and work programs for anyone willing to rebuild. It's what she dreamed of, a place where no one is too broken to start again. Applause filled the room. Harold smiled, tears welling up, not from sadness but from gratitude. He wasn't rich anymore, not in the old way. But his soul had more than money ever gave him. That night, he stayed late to clean the floors, his old job, his new peace. As he mopped, a little boy came up to him, no older than 7, holding a half-eaten roll of bread. Mister, the boy said shyly, were you friends with Miss Grace? Harold paused, resting his hand on the mop. Yes, the best friend I ever had. She said you'd help us now, the boy said. She was right. Double quotes. Harold knelt, smiling softly. She's still right. About everything. The boy grinned and ran off, crumbs scattering like tiny blessings across the floor. Later, alone in the quiet, Harold walked outside. The sky was streaked with violet and gold. The neon sign flickered above the door, Grace's table still glowing. He looked up, whispering, You were right, Grace. The weight wasn't pride, it was guilt. And you lifted it. He felt the wind shift, warm and steady, like an unseen hand brushing his shoulder. A year later, the Grace House opened on Easter Sunday. Hundreds attended, families, pastors, even some of Harold's old employees. A small plaque at the entrance read, In memory of Grace Miller, whose faith fed souls and whose mercy fed men. Underneath, in smaller letters, founded by Harold Jennings, once lost, now found. At the ceremony, Harold spoke only briefly. I used to think success meant people remembering your name, he said. Now I know it means remembering theirs. He paused, his voice trembling. Grace taught me that God doesn't humiliate us to destroy us. He humbles us to restore us. And every person who walks through these doors is proof of that. The crowd stood, clapping softly, reverently, not for him, but for the story that lived on through him. That evening, after the crowd left, Harold walked the halls of the Grace House alone. Each room echoed with laughter and life, children coloring on tables, men praying quietly in corners, women cooking in the kitchen. He reached the chapel at the back, where a simple cross hung above the altar. Below it, a photo of Grace, smiling, radiant, eternal. He knelt. Thank you, he whispered. For her, for the pain, for the lessons. He stayed there long after the lights dimmed, until the world outside turned quiet again. When he finally rose, he felt something new, a lightness in his chest, like the world had released its grip. The weight was gone, the lessons were learned. And for the first time, Harold Jennings walked away not as a man who'd been broken, but as a man who had been remade.